Hey guys, it's Nick. Welcome to another episode of T-365. Today's episode, we're going to talk about leveling up your conditional access policies, because as I look at the landscape today, I see our policies look a lot like Swiss cheese in that we have a lot of holes that either come over time through drift or deviation, as well as just a knowledge gap in the threat landscape, as well as best practices just because of scope changing from Microsoft quite frequently. So in this video, we're going to go through some of the key callouts as to why your policies might need an upgrade. We're going to take a look at some of the common threats in the landscape today, and I'm going to be providing you some recommendations on some baseline policies that I usually institute in my customer environments or with other MSPs to help protect against those threats, as well as showing you some multi-tenant level code from PowerShell that I developed that you can leverage to report on all the conditional access policies across your customers, as well as automate the deployment of your baseline within those customer environments as well. So stay tuned, there's definitely a lot to unpack today. As always, if this content's helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so getting into it here, first we're going to cover some of the complexities with conditional access, and these are the main reasons why I see a lot of misconfiguration or gaps in our conditional access policies today as we take a look at what we implement in our downstream customer environments. So the first consideration I want to take a look at is just scope and scope changes really at the end of the day. And when we talk about scope, we're really talking about two large buckets here. One of which is the threat landscape. And that is simply just saying that there's going to be new emerging threats, new attack vectors, always coming up that we have to be diligent about, and that's going to change what our conditional access policies look like. And then the second of which is kind of almost in parallel with this in a lot of cases, but it's Microsoft updates. And when I say that, a lot of us experience this. You log into the Entra portal, you take a look at your conditional access policy, and there's all these new settings that you can configure as part of the policy as well. Scope is constantly getting larger and larger with what you can do in those policies. And on one hand, that's great because we have more flexibility, we have more protections against these common attacks. But on the other hand, it's a constant learning curve. And essentially, when we take these new policies, we want to have a formal change process to review them and see if they should be part of our baseline or part of the baselines we have in our customer environments. The next thing that I want to talk about here is uniqueness in client environments. Certainly in a perfect world, we'd have a baseline of conditional access policies that we could just apply to all of our customers, but that's never going to be a reality. And a lot of factors go into this, but I'm just going to name off a few. This certainly isn't an inexhaustive list here, but very high level ones. Hybrid versus cloud only environments is going to be a big one here. We talk about remote hybrid work versus the office workers. Your security perimeter is going to look a little bit different, and how users can access data within there. You have considerations for legacy line of business applications that may be running on-prem. You have considerations for on-prem file shares, document repositories, things like that extend your security perimeter from a data access perspective. You have considerations for clients that fall under regulatory compliance, where you may want to put additional protections in place or more strict protections due to the regulations and audits that the client has to follow. And then in a lot of cases, we can also just talk about operational maturity. And when I say that, you may onboard a client that hasn't even fully adopted MFA in that use case. So the policies that you turn on are going to be different, in those use cases as well because of the end user impact. You may also have the use case where devices aren't enrolled into MDM with Intune. And so you can't put certain policies in place like compliance policies and things like that prevent access on a non-compliant device. So this all factors into what policies are you going to implement that might be either a diversion from your baseline or very unique and specific to the customer because of how their environment's configured, or outside considerations as well. This leads into another one here. And this one is, I think, one of the bigger struggles that we deal with just because of a resource constraint in a lot of cases, and that is really related to change management gaps. And when I talk about this, we have the concepts in a lot of use cases of desired state configuration of drift or deviations. And that is to say, maybe I have these conditional access policy baselines that I consider compliant. Well, I institute them in a compliant state at the genesis of creation, but over time they've kind of drifted into an uncompliant state. They don't match up with what I originally configured. A good example of this is if you have a conditional access policy that's enforcing MFA, but due to some operational constraint, you need to go in and create some exclusion for a user or for a service account to bypass MFA, maybe as an example. Maybe somebody does this without your purview or your knowledge within that use case, and then you have a security hole within your policies as well too. So they're really not compliant in that way, and you could still be breached just because of this kind of going on over time as well. So when we talk about the resource constraint here, I think, just a change advisory board or a CAB, not a lot of cases are you going to go through a formal approval process or review process for how you modify conditional access policies as well, just to have that level of governance. I think the other thing here is just periodic review. How often do you review your baselines to make sure that they haven't drifted? Is that something that you formally define as like a quarterly basis, things like that? And I think also, the being able to audit them, it's kind of similar vein to reviewing them as well too, but what protections do you have in place, in case you don't have a formal CAB, to audit and make sure that they haven't gone outside of your deviation without your purview or your knowledge, just to make sure you're, staying on top of being compliant in that state. And then the last one here I want to talk about is just really more about accountability. And I put this onus back because I see a lot of this in the space as well too, where you don't spend the time and invest the time to build a strategy around conditional access or the policies that you need to be implementing across your customers, specifically to their environments in a lot of cases. The people out there that are still using per user MFA and just barely, tapping into, modern methods of identity management, things like that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice from an operational sense and also a security sense. When we think about Microsoft in general, there's a lot of things that come out that we waste a lot of time with, like NCE is a big one that I can use as an example, where that wastes a lot of our time, not a lot of benefit, actually decreases our benefit. Conditional access policies is not one of those cases. I think if we think about a simple matrix of, your impact and your effort, in this particular case, conditional access, actually I would set it up here in the sense of the impact. Your effort's still going to be pretty high given the multi-tenant environment, but your security impact is going to be quite large if we think about all the protections that you can get by just putting conditional access policies in place and having a defined strategy behind that as well too. So now that we have a better understanding of kind of these different layers as far as why your policies might need an upgrade, I want to quickly talk about some of the common attacks or common attack vectors that we're seeing today. I'm going to follow up with that with some of the policies that you can put into place to help protect against that as well too. So I'm going to kind of progress up in the sense of severity of these types of attacks. And again, this is not all inclusive. These are just some popular ones that I wanted to reference. First one here is just credential harvesting. We certainly have various methods of which users try to garner access into an account, like password spray attacks, brute force attacks, things like that. But credential harvesting is just a basic phishing attempt that we think about when a user gets an email and they kind of have this malicious link that's disguised as something else. User clicks on that link, they get taken to a malicious website. They enter their credentials here, and then they're captured by the malicious actor. and then that account is then compromised as well. And this is very basic. This has been going on for years, and this is why we do security awareness training, things like that. And the basic way that you can protect against this is by performing or enforcing MFA on these accounts. It's just that second factor. Even if they did get this user's password, they still have that second factor of authentication to get through. Many of us are familiar with this. This is nothing new in this particular sense, but to kind of step up here in the next layer of attack, I want to talk about an attack that you can use, and attackers are leveraging today, to even bypass multi-factor authentication or get around or overcome multi-factor authentication. And this is known as an adversary in the middle attack. And I linked in my blog post that I supplement with this video, a great video by Elliot Monroe, just kind of talking about or showing you a great example of this. But effectively, you know, when we talk about this, we have a similar attack path here where the user is technically getting a link in an email here that they can click on, and effectively they'll open up a browser window here, and it acts as a piece of middleware, if you will, for looking like a legitimate website with their company branding and all that. So it might, you know, look like something like login.microsoftonline. But it might have, you know, 2 L's in that name, and it's really hard for the user to spot. But for them, they might have their company branding on this, and they're going to authenticate just like they normally do to Microsoft. So they're going to add their username, their password, and their MFA prompt that they'll fulfill. And effectively, in this case, this malicious website will redirect them to the legitimate website for Microsoft. But in the process of doing that, they basically have harvested their password and this token here that satisfies the MFA request. So technically the attacker here can take that set of credentials, because they also know their username. In this particular case, you should add this in here as part of the subset of what they get. And then they can actually go to legit Microsoft website, and they can sign in with those credentials as well too, and they can get access to that user's account. So that's another method here that I quickly wanted to allude to. Next one here is something that is known as pass the cookie. And with this attack, similar, user gets some email here, they click on a malicious link, and that link technically has some malware that's installed on their device itself. And typically this will happen with personally owned devices, which is again a big reason why you should really have a strict policy around only leveraging corporate owned devices and devices that you manage the security stack on for users to be able to authenticate into their account. But in this case, it installs malware on the device, and then this attacker is going to remote in to the device, and then from there they're going to go into their browser and effectively there's going to be a cookie in there that's going to store their session. And this session token that they have in there, you know, basically satisfied their authentication in that particular case with even MFA approved of that. So they can take this cookie and they can use it to sign in to Microsoft, maybe on another device or another system, something like that. And then they could do malicious things from there, like resetting the user's password, adding another device to register another device for MFA. It's just another way, you know, that they can really go in and create some damage in that particular case as well. And then the last one, or last concepts here, I want to talk about is persistence techniques. And again, this isn't going to be all inclusive of all the techniques you can do, but I quickly, to that point of, persistence and lateral movement, some of the methods of which an attacker is going to try after they get access, depending on the user account. The first thing that they want to do, let's take a look at our adversary in the middle attack. They're going to get this token, and that token they can use, and along with the credentials they can use to sign in. But this token itself has a time to live of 1 hour by default, and with Microsoft's defaulted continuous access evaluations that are going on in Entra, it will actually end their session, and if they've changed hands there, it might make them try to sign in again. So what the attacker is going to try to go do here is they're going to say, oh, well, I need to maintain persistence, so I'm going to go, into the sign-in settings and security settings for this account. I'm going to join a new device with MFA on there as well too, like the Authenticator app or SMS, something like that. Just so I already still know this user's password, I can maintain persistence because now I don't know, or I don't have to get prompted for the MFA token. I can actually get one sent to my device as well too. So this is just another method of which they can kind of just stay within the account and leverage this. So now I quickly wanted to take you through some of the conditional access baselines that I always recommend to put in the environment, at least at this point in time. Again, threat landscape's constantly changing, so you want to adapt to that. But I'm going to show you how you protect against all these types of attacks and the ways in which you might want to roll that out to your customers. Okay, so I've linked this blog post in the bottom of this video here, but effectively this is everything I've been covering in this video, but also this is the list of the conditional access policies that I recommend. Again, this is not all inclusive, and over time these might expand or alter based off of the threat landscape, so just keep that in mind as you go through these. But the first one here is require strict location continuous access evaluation. And this is a very strict policy, does have a large user impact if we're talking about just leveraging trusted locations within the environment. But this is an example of how we can prevent the adversary in the middle attack here, basically because continuous access evaluation is on by default in Microsoft, and it's basically every hour it's checking in for certain changes that would say, hey, this session's done, re-authenticate. In this particular case, if this attacker, compromised this user, got this token, and they try to use this token on a legitimate website locally where they were, it would immediately block them from doing so because it's not one of the trusted locations within that environment, and they can probably see with the log itself that's a different IP address. So they would be prevented from signing in to the actual website, and that's how you would prevent, this evil jinx type of attack going on within your environment. I did link in here, this was an interesting real live use case that somebody posted a while back where this exact event occurred. They got compromised, they signed in, they joined another device for MFA, and this was a way in which they could have prevented that if they had the strict location enforcement with the continuous access evaluation going on. So it's definitely something you try to implement in your customer environments. It is very hard to do, requires a lot of upfront work, just to understand where users are signing in from, especially, it's much harder, I would just say, in a remote or hybrid workforce versus if everybody is just local to the office. So keep that one in mind. It's definitely a good one to implement. Requiring MFA for all users, really straightforward here, non-negotiable for every customer environment you should have. I'm not a fan of excluding trusted locations from this policy. I think users should get in the motion of being prompted for multi-factor authentication and just having that as an exercise that they are very comfortable with. So I don't like doing, I'm at the office, so I don't need MFA. I prefer not to have that within these environments. Require MFA for admins, I consider this kind of like a backup, and just in case, like when we talk about drift and deviation, this is where you would maybe exclude a certain admin user on accident or maybe purposefully, but leaves a security hole. I want to make sure that that admin user, if they're like global admin credentials as an example, doesn't get exposed in that way. So you want to have some backup there. Phishing resistant MFA for admins. I think in, again, a perfect world, we'd have phishing resistant MFA across all of our customers, like they're using FIDO2 keys or Windows Hello, something like that we can use to prevent, that would also prevent, the attacks like Evil Jinx, adversary in the middle attacks, that type of attack method as well. But realistically, especially in small business, this is going to not be a thing for quite some time. But I think one of the things that you can try at least is to try to set up phishing resistant MFA for admin accounts, high profile users maybe as a goal, and start there and work your way. If you're an MSP for your internal tenant, I would definitely try to use phishing resistant MFA for your high profile applications like Microsoft Partner Center, where you access all your downstream customers, things like that. And that will get you a feel for, using FIDO2 keys all the time or something like that as well too, that have that additional factor of protection for us. MFA for guest users, don't let guest users be the way in which you get exposed. Can easily lead to data loss in a lot of cases if they're interacting as part of a project with users in your organization. And attackers, if they compromise a guest user, much more in a place of higher propensity to expose somebody based off of social engineering because they've already established maybe a level of trust given that is a guest user, that's communicating with them. This is another backup policy I put in place for Azure management. It's usually recommended, but I usually like to put extra protections for Azure and Azure subscriptions just due to the nature of resource consumption and certain attacks or methods that we've seen where attackers have gone in and spun up a crypto mining infrastructure and blown up the account with charges. So again, another one that I just like to have in place just for extra protection. Requiring MFA to join or register devices. I think when we talk about persistence techniques, this is a great one here to require authentication, extra authentication there, just in case we have basic credential phishing that happens if a user doesn't have MFA. Somebody can't join an anonymous device to our network in that particular case and maybe do extra reconnaissance or even try to move laterally from there. So this is another good one to set up. Just keep in mind, for net new users that need to fulfill the MFA requirement, you will need that temporary access pass and that workflow set up. If you don't know what that is, linked it in there just so you have complete context. Authentication flows, I didn't touch on this one in this video. I'll do a separate video of it, but effectively here you have what's known as a device authentication flow in which an attacker can send a device code and a legitimate Microsoft feed as far as a login method with their device code that they're setting up, but they'll use that to pass in a token back to the attacker, and then they have sign-in rights again to another device that they're leveraging, things like that. And a lot of attackers are using this in combination with a QR code today to basically get the user to sign in and say, hey, if you want to view this document that's in DocuSign, I alluded to this up here, you have to scan this code, maybe put in this device code to authenticate. And there's a lot of unique factors around that. I put in, some of the additional constraints in that as well too. But it's just another method that you can prevent. You don't really need to be running device code auth in most of your customer tenants, if not all, in that particular case. Block unapproved countries, good baseline one, especially if you're in the US or just UK or whatnot. If you block any outside country, it could prevent a lot of malicious activity from happening. If a credential is stolen, if a token is stolen, and that token expires, they still have credentials or a backdoor to get access. If they're coming in from a different country, then they'll be blocked as well. So it's just another layer of protection. We have legacy authentication, very straightforward here. I see a lot of exclusions in some cases because we have a printer or a scanner. And it's really important that you leverage modern authentication devices for those. And they link a helpful article here, really, so you can see how to do that. Don't let printers or scanners be the reason why you don't put these additional protections into place. Next one here is also more of an automated flow for high-risk users, high-risk sign-ins. Keep in mind this does require Entra ID P2 licensing. You should have it by default in your MSP because we get these licenses as complimentary from Microsoft as being a partner in this particular case. But effectively, the only caveat that I see here that I want to call out is that some people leverage conditional access policies where they have the users reset their passwords as part of that conditional access configuration if they're flagged as high risk. But I believe in being overly cautious here in this and kind of just making sure we perform the necessary checks and having somebody actually review that account versus just saying, yeah, just go reset your password and you'll be back in. I'd rather block that user if they've been flagged for high risk in that particular use case. Require managed devices for sign-in. So this is really just saying like we're not taking personal accounts or personal devices for your sign-in. We want to have our AV, our EDR protection, everything on that device to help prevent against, like the pass the cookie method, right? It's not going to say it's going to always prevent that. They might still get malware on the device, but there's much lesser chance than somebody's personal device that doesn't have your protections. Require compliant devices. I think when we think about operational maturity and the level of enforcement that causes high level impact to the users, it's probably one of the highest, if not the highest on the list, because it requires devices to be enrolled in Intune, requires device compliance on a continuous basis, but it is giving you one of the highest levels of protection. It is one that I try to aspire to in regulatory clients at a minimum, just due to the nature of how sensitive that data is that they're interacting with. On their device or on the go as well. Browser sessions shall not be persisted for privileged users. I make an asterisk here that this is only for privileged users, specifically global admins, if you want to scope it down to a really narrow focus. Some people do this where they have non-persistent browser sessions for all users, and I think that's very, very user disruptive. You'll get a lot of users really complaining about that just because it'll kick them out of their session. They have to re-authenticate every X amount of time. And I think that that's not, kind of balancing out security with productivity in a lot of cases. I would recommend it though for the admins, even like a TTL of an hour of their session expiring, just so the admin really has to sign in every hour. I think that's functionally okay, given that it has such a wide attack surface. App protection policies required for mobile devices. This is simply just saying like users want to access their data on the go, but you don't want to enroll all of their personal cell phones into your MDM solution, and they don't want that either. They don't want you to have wipe capabilities on their device. So app protection policies with Intune is part of the MAM settings, and this allows you to both encrypt the data, perform additional security protections like having the user create a PIN when they first sign in using Face ID to get access to the data, and then you can wipe the data and specifically just the data on that app if a user leaves or if that device is lost or stolen. So it's a great way to compromise giving user access, but also making sure that they are, kind of leveraging your policies in that sense as well. And then mobile devices shall be only be able to access corporate data through client-approved apps. It's basically saying they can't use the native mail client on their phone, like the iOS device and the native mail client on iOS. They would be redirected to download the Outlook app. And that allows you, again, to leverage the app protection policies, to have encryption, to wipe the device, to wipe the data, I should say, and put those additional security protections into place as well. Now that we understand more of our baselines, let's shift over back to the whiteboard so I can talk about other key tips that you want to take in mind from an operational sense. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding about the baselines that help protect against those common attacks, I want to go through some other key tips here that I leverage and that you want to leverage when you think about this from an operational sense to help you scale this across your customers. The first thing I want to talk about is pretty basic and should be common knowledge here for all of us, but when you implement these baselines, you want to put them all into your customer environments, but you want to have them in report only till you formally roll those out. And that just helps against any type of end user impact, business downtime really, if you think about blocking somebody outside of their account because of the conditional access policies you put into play, turning them on to report only, monitoring the sign-in logs to see how it's going to affect certain users or groups is definitely one of the best recommendations you can have for slowly implementing these out and really not causing significant impact to the business. So the number two recommendation here, I'm going to call this naming conventions. And that's really just saying that you want to have the same naming convention in every single customer tenant so that it makes it easier to report on. When I show you guys the script I built later for the multi-tenant reporting around what policies you have in place across your customer environments, if you name them the same in each customer tenant, you can quickly discern your gaps in customer environments of who has things on, off, where they're missing, all of that across your customer base. And that is to say, we leverage something like as an example, require MFA all users. If that's what you name it in one tenant, that's what you name it in all the tenants as well. Just again, so you have some consistencies there, and it'll make it easier on your technicians or your service members that are actually implementing this within the environment. The third recommendation here is to use deployment rings. I think you can think a lot of deploying conditional access policies similar to how you manage patches today with your devices, given that you want to have these really in these bands where you have your early adopters here in the first band, or your beta testers, company users that know the business well, maybe the liaison, maybe your primary contact, and you have your second wave of users that kind of get the implementation, and then your third wave. So if you use groups in Active Directory, you can fully roll these out, but it's again just coming back to the user experience and making sure that we're not missing anything when it comes to the uniqueness of the client environment, and we're creating a better client experience in that particular case as well too. So the very last one that I want to talk about is to simply reduce your decisions. So when we talk about this, I really mean that you are being really strict about what you say is a non-negotiable. Like MFA should obviously be in that bucket of enforcing MFA for all users. But I think, as another common example here, I would always try to pursue an option where personal devices are not allowed to access corporate resources. If you do allow personal devices, the baseline that I showed you, as well as all your considerations, grow exponentially. The amount of decisions you have to make if you allow personal devices, the amount of complexity you have to add, if you let this happen, grows exponentially if you want to still maintain security, in my mind, because you're adding policies to grant them maybe limited rights into certain applications. You're giving them, certain capabilities that are very uniquely scoped to the personal aspect of this, and it's still, like we saw in the Pass the Cookie example, exposing you to some unique constraints there as well too. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of the baselines and some of these extra considerations, next I want to show you some of the ways in which you can start to leverage conditional access as code with PowerShell, and a couple of projects that are open source that I think are pretty cool in managing this across your customer environments. Okay, so the last main topic I want to cover here is conditional access as code, and this isn't new. This has been around for many years, but there is some technical barriers here to entry. I think there's been a lot of progression over time, but I wanted to show you some of the ways in which you can leverage some open source projects, maybe for how to get into a good change control process around the lifecycle of conditional access policies, as well as automating the deployment of your baselines of conditional access policies in your customer tenants as well too. And that's all leveraging PowerShell behind the scenes. And then I'll show you some of the multi-tenant level scripts that I've written here for conditional access specifically, so that you can report on those and identify some of the gaps you maybe have across your customers. So the first one that I wanted to showcase here, this is an open source project. It's kind of like forked from many different creators, MVPs, things like that. And it effectively here gives you the ability to basically set your baselines, and you're doing so, when we talk about conditional access as code, you're doing so based off of this JSON body. And in this particular case, we're saying, hey, this is the admin protection baseline I have, and then all apps require MFA for admins. Now, again, take a look here, because this is a naming convention, again, that we can leverage across all of our customers, and that's what we can use to monitor and report on, which I'll show here in a few minutes. But this is effectively saying, hey, you've taken the output of, the actual configuration of your policy, and it is in here, for you to say is in a bundled offering, and you're defining kind of what folder that's in as well too. So if we take a look at the main script here, I'm not going to run this or go through this with you just for the sake of time, but you're defining certain things like, do we need to create the groups that are part of the exclusions, or the deployment rings that we have, or the emergency access accounts, the service accounts that maybe are the AD sync users that we need to exclude here as well. And what this is doing is you're kind of just defining at the end of this really more so, the folder that has all of your policies in it, and it'll loop through all of those and create them all in the tenant for you as well. So it's a great one for net new onboarding for your customers that you might have, where you can just simply take, your baselines, deploy them. They're all going to be like in report only mode. And then you can go from there as far as the actual assignments and things like that. Should help you speed up quite a bit when it comes to your overall deployment and making sure you have consistency with this as well. The other one that I wanted to show you here is more around change management, lifecycle of conditional access policies from Microsoft here. But you can go in and you can see more about this project. I think the main thing that I wanted to show you is that this is cool to me in that you can leverage kind of some hooks into Microsoft Teams for approvals and adaptive cards to say, hey, when you make a new or make a new conditional access policy, or you've modified one, maybe we go through an approval process. And this gets back to the change control that you can have that prevents drift, it prevents unauthorized conditional access policies being changed, non-compliance across them as well too. And it also allows you to automate the deployment additionally. And this isn't built up or set up, I guess, for multi-tenancy. And this way I might look to do that myself, because it seems like it could be a good use case. But you're effectively, working through these various buckets of configure, test, deploy, monitor, and manage as part of that. And again, follows the same concepts of conditional access as code, and it leverages a Azure Logic app, which isn't expensive by any means to set up. And it's just like Power Automate in that there's a chain of flow really that you follow really to configure your policies and assign them out. I also built a couple of PowerShell scripts that you can leverage here. This first one gets all of the conditional access policies across your customers and puts them into a single CSV. The main thing here is you do need to follow some prerequisites to get the secure application model set up if you haven't already with your GDAP permissions in order for this to actually work. I linked a blog post where I cover that. It is extensive if you haven't done it already, but you already had that set up. Shouldn't be a problem. But this is effectively kind of looping through each customer, grabbing all of the conditional access policies and documenting them into a single Excel sheet. When you run this, it will go through and it will loop through. I just have a test partner center with some test tenants in there. It will loop through each customer and it'll process their conditional access policies into the CSV. It will also tell you and actually log all the errors into a single audit log in another CSV, just in case maybe you don't have the necessary permissions set up or any other errors, like they don't have Entra ID P2 or P1 licensing as an example, because that's required to get conditional access policies, obviously. So that'll kind of loop through and it doesn't break the script if they don't have that licensing. After that's done, a CSV file will automatically, or Excel file will automatically open here. Again, I just have some test data, so there's only 2 customers in this list, but this will output all customers and all of your conditional access policies with all of the various settings across the board, so you can visualize that kind of in a single isolated view. And this is where I was mentioning, if you have the same naming conventions, things like that, you can maybe quickly find gaps in your deployments across your customers or potential misconfigurations as well too. And I'm looking maybe to build that into the logic as part of the actual script, but I wanted to just at least give you the output for right now. The other script that I have here allows you to loop through your conditional access policies and try to find basically excluded users either through direct exclusions or through group memberships that really maybe necessarily should not be excluded. In my mind, licensed users really should not be excluded from conditional access policies. You should be using service accounts. They should be unlicensed in that way for exclusions that have policies or bound to policies that enforce MFA. So you can check these out. I'll link them in my blog, and you can leverage these to help you level up too with the conditional access policies that you're enforcing across customers. Okay, so we certainly covered a lot in this video. I appreciate if you're still watching, making it this far, maybe wondering what's next. What can I do to kind of action off of this? And you want to take this in a strategic approach here. I've outlined it in the last part of this blog. But effectively here, you want to begin just simply document what you have today in your customer environments. Leverage that script to pull the report, see what you have, see maybe where you have displacement against your baseline, if you've even established a baseline yet. And then really, either refine or create your MSP approved baseline for conditional access. Maybe you take a lot of what I showed as far as the recommendations there, you sprinkle it in what might be unique to your customer environment, or you alter it based off of how you operate today, knowing that you are checking some boxes of some common threats and protections against those. But you also want to put that naming convention into place as well too. And if maybe you do have all your baselines in your customers, but they all are named something different, so it's hard to report on, and you don't have a lot of organization behind that, that might be also the path you go down. You do want to test these baselines out in your tenant. I think that gives you the best end user experience workflow exposure, so you know what you're implementing. Maybe you can craft better communications around when you turn these policies on in your customer tenant. You want to update your customer environments with your baseline, and maybe that is using the conditional access as code method to do so, and kind of rolling through your clients. And in a lot of cases, you're going to have those in report only. In some cases, they might not be applicable. You may want to update the name with not applicable in those use cases. So again, you fall back on the reporting, be able to quickly see maybe where you have gaps. You want to turn this into a project plan, that you can use to implement these conditional access policies. And I would do that based off the impact that they could have. Like users who haven't fully adopted MFA, they should be the priority. They should get, the first level of policies turned on, and you should be getting them fully enrolled in MFA versus, requiring device compliance. You might have to do a project to enroll devices in Intune before you do that. Change management process, at bare minimum, if you're an MSP with limited resources, you should have some type of formal policy to submit and approve new conditional access policies or updates that are part of your baseline. And then you should define a formal approval or review date, which at bare minimum, again, like every 6 months, right? Or if it's even annual, at least you're doing it at a cadence that you can then begin to review and hopefully get down to a more micro scale with some alerting to go along with that to detect drift. Any deviations that you have against your policies or any exclusions that you have to create due to some uniqueness in the environment should be documented on a per customer layer. You can put this in IT Glue, Hoodoo, whatever documentation you use, but it should be documented for the technicians, especially if you have a breach. This is one of the things that you want to go look to as part of those post-breach activities. And then lastly here, you want to put a formal process in place to add these baselines to your tenant on onboarding. You could leverage that project, the open source project, to simply push your baselines into a tenant when they onboard as part of that process, and spend a lot less time doing so because you're doing it in an automated fashion. So that's everything I want to cover for you guys. Definitely comment below with anything that you saw that you had questions on, or what you're doing today around conditional access. And as always, like the channel if you want to see more content around Microsoft and the MSP space. I'll see you guys next week.